30 days ago, I ran an experiment on myself. Not a diet, not a productivity challenge, not another morning routine I'd abandoned by week 2. I tried to change the actual structure of my brain. And I want to be specific about what that means because this isn't a metaphor and it isn't self-help. Neuroscientists have known for decades that the brain physically rewires itself in response to experience. New connections form. Old ones weaken. The architecture shifts. The question I wanted to answer was simple. Can you do that deliberately? Can you choose, consciously, intentionally, to become someone your current brain isn't? What I found was not what I expected. And the most surprising part had nothing to do with discipline or willpower or even the practices themselves. It had to do with something your brain is doing right now, without your permission, that almost guarantees you'll stay exactly who you already are. Here's what it is. Your brain is defaulting. Not occasionally, constantly. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network, a set of brain regions that activate automatically the moment you're not focused on a specific task. It's the mental background hum, the inner monologue, the loop that plays when nothing else demands your attention. And here's what that loop is playing. The same thoughts it played yesterday, the same ones from last week, almost certainly the same ones from years ago. Not because you're lazy, not because you lack self-awareness, but because your brain is designed, genuinely engineered, for efficiency. And efficiency, to the brain, means repetition. Every thought you've had on autopilot has carved a small groove in your neural architecture. Every repeated reaction has deepened it. After enough time, grooves become roads. And roads become the only path you know. Neuroscientists call this Hebbian theory. Neurons that fire together, wire together. What that means in plain language is this. Your personality isn't who you are. It's who you've practiced being, mostly without realizing you were practicing at all. Think about the last time you felt genuinely anxious, or snapped at someone, or felt suddenly and completely like you weren't enough. Did it feel new? Or did it feel exactly, almost mechanically, like every time before? That's not a coincidence. That's not weakness. That's infrastructure. And understanding that distinction is the first thing that actually changes something. Here's where most people go wrong. When someone decides to change, they approach it like a home renovation. Tear out the bad habits. Install good ones. Repeat until the house looks different. So they download the meditation app. Start the journal. Build the morning routine. And for a while, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, it works. They feel different. They feel like someone who has finally figured it out. And then, quietly, they don't. The new behaviors fade. The old patterns return. And the story they tell themselves afterward is always some version of the same line. I just don't have the discipline. I'm not the kind of person who sticks to things. But that story is wrong. And more importantly, it's pointing at the wrong problem. They didn't fail because of discipline. They failed because they changed the behavior without changing the mind beneath it. Layering new habits onto an unexamined inner world is like painting over rust. It looks better for a while, but the structure underneath is the same, and eventually everything shows. Now here's the deeper misconception, the one almost no one questions. The belief that understanding your patterns is enough to change them. It isn't. You can have perfect insight into why you self-sabotage, and still self-sabotage. You can know, with complete intellectual clarity, that your anxiety is irrational, and still lie awake at 2 a.m., consumed by it. Knowing and becoming are not the same process. They don't even use the same parts of the brain. The brain doesn't change through insight. It changes through experience. And that one distinction changes everything that comes after it. So what actually changes the brain? Neuroscience, stripped of the pop science version, points to 3 conditions. Not 10. Not a complex protocol. 3. Novelty, emotion, repetition. Start with novelty. The brain is fundamentally a prediction machine. Its primary job is to anticipate what comes next. And when it can predict accurately, it stops paying attention. It economizes. It goes on autopilot. This is why your morning commute disappears from memory. Your brain predicted everything about it before it happened. But your first day in a new city stays vivid for years. The brain encodes what it hasn't seen before, because that's the only information it actually needs. Familiarity is the enemy of learning. The brain doesn't grow in comfortable territory. It grows at the edge of what it already knows. Emotion comes second. The amygdala, the brain's threat and emotional processing center, functions as a significance filter. Experiences tied to strong emotion are encoded deeper, remembered longer, and shape future behavior more powerfully than neutral experiences. This is why you can forget 100 ordinary days, but remember exactly where you were the moment something devastated you. It's not a flaw. It's a survival mechanism. But it also means that change without emotional engagement barely registers. The brain doesn't take notes on things that don't matter. Repetition is third, but not mindless repetition. That just deepens the grooves you're trying to escape. Repetition with variation. Engage practice that stays slightly uncomfortable, slightly beyond what you already know how to do. These three conditions, novelty, emotion, repetition, are the environment in which neuroplasticity actually operates. Not motivation, not intention, not wanting it badly enough. And here's where something William James wrote over a century ago becomes unsettling. James, often called the father of American psychology, argued that we do not think our way into new ways of acting. We act our way into new ways of thinking. The brain follows behavior, not the other way around. This is the reversal almost nobody makes. Most people wait to feel ready before they act differently. They want the confidence before the attempt, the certainty before the commitment. But the feeling of being different doesn't come before the action. It comes as a result of it. Your brain isn't waiting for you to be ready. It's waiting for you to begin. And this is where it stops being psychology and starts being something older. Because if your neural pathways can change, if your automatic responses, your emotional patterns, your inner narrator, all of it can be rewritten, then what exactly are you? There's a thought experiment that's been troubling philosophers for over 2,000 years. The ship of Theseus. The ship that carried the hero Theseus was preserved in an Athenian harbor as a monument. But over time, its planks began to rot. One by one, they were replaced with new wood. Eventually, every single plank had been replaced. The question that has haunted philosophers ever since: is it still the same ship? Now apply that question to yourself. If your neural pathways change, if your automatic reactions change, your self-talk changes, the way you interpret everything that happens to you changes, are you still the same person? And if you are, what part of you is the constant? What's the thing that remains while everything else shifts? Heraclitus put it more bluntly than anyone has managed since. No man ever steps in the same river twice. Not because the river moved, because a man did too. You're not a fixed object moving through time. You're a process. A river, not a rock. Sartre took that further. He argued that we have no fixed nature, no essential self that exists before our choices. We're defined entirely by what we do, what we become, what we keep choosing to be. And in his framework, the statement "I can't change, it's just who I am" isn't self-knowledge. It's what he called bad faith. A refusal to acknowledge something terrifying, that you are always at every moment in the process of choosing who you are, including right now. The self is not where you start. It's what you build. Let's make this concrete, because abstract philosophy is easy to admire and easy to forget. Think about someone you know who has always been described as hot-tempered. Maybe it's someone in your life. Maybe, honestly, it's you. They've apologized 100 times, made the same promise 100 times, and they mean it genuinely every single time. But the reaction happens before the thought arrives. Because anger is their brain's most practiced response to the feeling of being threatened. The pathway is wide, well-worn, and extraordinarily fast. Telling them to calm down is like telling water not to run downhill. The rewiring isn't about suppressing the anger. It's about building a competing pathway, one that reaches the prefrontal cortex a fraction of a second before the amygdala fires. That pathway doesn't come from insight. It comes from repetition, from catching it early, from tiny moments of deliberate pause, practiced so many times that the pause itself becomes architecture. Now, think about the chronic overthinker, lying awake at midnight, replaying a conversation from 3 years ago, running through every possible way tomorrow could go wrong. Not because they're fragile, but because their brain learned somewhere early that vigilance equals safety. That if you think far enough ahead, you can prevent the pain before it arrives. The thinking was once a solution. It outlived the problem it was solving, and now it runs on its own, like a program no one can find the off switch for. The rewiring here isn't positive affirmations. It's building repeated, real evidence through small, actual experiences that the present moment is survivable without armor. And then there's the person who stopped trying a long time ago, who says quietly but firmly, "I've always been like this," who has told that story so many times it has become load-bearing, the thing their entire sense of self rests on. For them, the pattern isn't just behavioral, it's identity. And the brain will defend identity more ferociously than almost anything else it protects. Because changing for them doesn't just feel difficult. It feels like disappearing. So what do you actually do? Not a list of habits. Not a challenge with checkboxes. Something more foundational than that. 3 shifts in awareness. Not techniques, but changes in what you're able to see. First, learn to notice the narrator, not just the thought. When a familiar pattern begins, the anxiety spiral, the self-critical loop, the sudden certainty that something is wrong or that you're not enough, don't try to stop it. Just take one step back and ask, whose voice is this? When did I first think this way? How old was I when this became my automatic response? The moment you can observe a pattern, you're no longer entirely inside it. That distance, even a millimeter of it, is the beginning of a new pathway. Not the end of the old one, just the beginning of something else. Second, do something small that your current self wouldn't do. Not dramatically, not a grand gesture, just slightly outside the script. Respond differently in a familiar situation. Say the thing you'd normally hold back. Let yourself be seen in a way you'd usually prevent. Every time you act outside the pattern, you hand your brain new evidence about who you are. And the brain has to account for that evidence. It has no choice. Third, make the uncomfortable familiar, not the familiar comfortable. Most people want to feel ready before they change. They seek comfort as preparation. But neuroscience suggests the opposite is true. Mild, manageable discomfort is the signal that new wiring is actually happening. If it feels completely easy, your brain is on an existing road. It already knows this territory. The edge of discomfort isn't the warning to stop. It's the signal that you've arrived somewhere your brain hasn't been before. 30 days didn't give me a new brain, but something did shift, and I want to be precise about what. The old patterns are still there. They don't disappear. The grooves don't fill in overnight. I still feel the familiar pull of old reactions, the impulse to overthink, to withdraw, to become whoever I've always been in difficult moments. But the gap between stimulus and response grew slightly wider. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough that I occasionally catch myself watching the pattern rather than becoming it. Enough to sometimes choose before the default takes over. Viktor Frankl, a man who survived the worst circumstances the 20th century produced, wrote that between stimulus and response there is a space. And in that space lies human freedom. 30 days of deliberate practice didn't rewrite who I am. It helped me find the space. And here's what I keep returning to, the thought that has genuinely stayed with me since this began. You have been practicing being who you are for years. Every automatic thought, every repeated reaction, every story you've told about yourself in the quiet moments nobody else sees. Your brain has been listening to all of it, taking notes, building you faithfully, carefully, without judgment, according to the instructions you didn't know you were giving it. Which means you are not a fixed thing waiting to be improved. You are an ongoing instruction. The question I want to leave you with isn't how do I change? It's this, what have you been practicing? And is it still what you want to become? Sit with that one. The answer usually says more than the question.